OOP ties the verb to the subject. The verb is your method, and the subject is your object or your class. This creates an artificial restriction that does not exist in our language, which results in that you prohibit your ability to think and you complicate your code. Now, I am a software developer, but I can also play guitar. It happens to be one of my skills. As a hobby musician though, I need to emphasize, but it doesn't matter. So now, if we were to create a class hierarchy modeling me, then I would thoroughly belong in the software developer category, implying if you were to instantiate an object that represents me, that object would be of type software developer. However, now you have actually eliminated 99.9999999% of what I am. Because the software developer class doesn't have a method that says play guitar. Now, the fix for this in traditional software development is that we create God methods whose names are execute or evaluate or eval or do stuff, which allows us to extend OOP such that we can allow for future objects of a particular instance to do tasks we didn't anticipate when we originally designed the class hierarchy. What you have done now is effectively to implement an inferior version of function programming on top of OOP. Now, let me show you how I work in a functional programming language. Here I am inside of Cloudlets. Let's say I need to have an HTTP endpoint with RBAC authorization for root and admin roles that extracts data from my database. This is kind of like similar to one of the things I showed a couple of days ago in one of my other YouTube videos. But ignoring that fact, let's focus on the functional programming parts and the lack of OOP today. So then I go to SQL Studio because I want to see the schema of my database, right? I want to use my Chinook database. Let's say I want to join on album and artist. Okay, so now let me go into SQL Studio. Select all from album, AL, inner join, artist, AR on AR dot, artist ID equal AL dot, artist ID. And then I don't want to select all, but I want to select AR dot, maybe name, AR dot, AL dot, maybe title, and maybe I want to have AL dot album ID. Limit order by AL dot name title limit 10. Okay, so now I have an SQL here, right? And let's move this guy to the first spot just to make it more clear. So now I'm doing a join in an SQL where I'm getting basically as artist, AL title, as album. So now I'm doing a join between artists and albums, right? So now I have an SQL that does what I want it to do, and let's make it slightly better formatted. Like this, and now I can save this as a snippet test, right, for later, cases. But we wanted to create an endpoint, right? So I'm going to copy this code. Then I'm going to go into create, and then I'm going to go into hyper-ID modules and create a new folder, call it test2. Then inside of this folder, I'm going to create get albums or albums.get.hl, and then let me give it a description. Returns albums for artists. Okay. Data.connect Chinook data.select, and then return minus, and then we needed authorization of .ticket .verify for admin role and root role. Save, execute, let's see what it does. And it does exactly what we want it to do. I'm now done with the endpoint. I'm done. I'm literally done. And let me just illustrate that by removing authentication and go into endpoints here and prove the fact of that I am now done, but by opening this thing in a new browser window, and you can clearly see JSON being returned from my HTTP endpoint. Now, if I want to edit this code and maybe return an additional column, then what I need to do then is that, okay, let's start out with SQL Studio in a different tab, just to make sure that, we can test it before we change the production code. Let's say I need an additional column here. Okay, AL dot. AL dot. Wrong database. Album ID. Could not add album ID with the same name. Yeah, because we already have album ID. Okay, so let's do AR, artist ID. And I'm now returning one additional column. If I need to edit my endpoint, it's literally as simple as exchanging the SQL like this. And now my endpoint returns also artist ID. If I was to use OOP on that code, I'd need a view model, I'd need to configure my ORM library, I'd need a database model. It's got a join, so I couldn't reuse any of my existing view models or database models, right? Because it's got a join between two different tables, so none of the previously created models would work. I'd need to configure AutoMapper to map between view model and database model. I'd need, if I were to follow best practices on Solid, I'd need an interface implementation for a service, and then the interface itself, which I'm passing into my controller endpoint. I need a controller endpoint, etc., etc., etc. Then, of course, due to the complexity of the code, I'd need to actually create unit tests for it, because I now got 25 freaking files I need to verify actually works and do what they do. So I'd need to create unit tests. Since I'm using IO and my tests are touching indeterministic code, I'd need a mock object for my test, etc., etc., etc. So what I just did in 1 minute would take half a week using traditional OOP, right? But in my code, I don't care about, view models. Whatever the SQL returns, I freaking return it to the client, right? So every single column that my SQL contains is just simply by default returned back to the client as is. There's no view model, there's no database model, there's no mapper configuration, there's no IOC container configuration code, there is no interfaces, there are no service implementations, there are no unit tests, etc., etc. And while we're at it, why would I even care about versioning that code? Took me 60 seconds to create it. If it's deleted, I really don't give a shit. I mean, it's faster for me to recreate the code than it is for me to redeploy the code if it was somehow accidentally deleted or something like that. And every time I do a change, I don't, even though I save straight to production, I copy the SQL and I go into SQL Studio and I play with the SQL until I can verify with 100% certainty that it actually works the way I expect it to work. So why would I even care about Git for that code? Now, of course, if I had 100 endpoints like that all of a sudden, or 20, I'd probably start caring about versioning and you know, Git and version control. And I do that, and I need to emphasize that, you know, when I need Git, I use Git, and Magic itself has 8,600 commits. It's got pipelines that triggers, you know, Docker builds and automatically pushes to Docker Hub, and you know, it's executing unit tests. Magic's got 1,326 unit tests, etc., etc., etc. But there exists code where none of those things applies, where you don't need unit tests, you don't need Git, you don't need automatic deployments, you definitely do not need OOP, right? OOP is madness. Now, of course, I need to emphasize, because now people are going to criticize me because I'm mixing up subjects. Actually, I'm not. I'm talking about best practices, right? That's what I'm talking about. And OOP happens to be one of our best practices, right? So you take away OOP, you release cognitive energy. You take away Git, you release cognitive energy, allowing you to think about code from a different perspective, which results in new solutions.